right, hello everyone, and welcome to the first session of our professional coaching program. I'm Hima Vaidula, and I'm co-governor of the New York State chapter of the American College of Cardiology, along with Dr. Hari Naidu, who is also here with us tonight. And so this four-part series that's titled Microaggressions, Bias, and Toxicity, Navigating Difficult Interactions in Cardiology is the result of a project spearheaded by the New York ACC in collaboration with the Pennsylvania chapter of the ACC. And Dr. Nosheen Reza from the University of Pennsylvania is here with us, and she was also one of the key members who made this program possible. And she'll actually be hosting the next part of the series. And a couple of other members who were instrumental in creation of this program, including Dr. Tanya Singh, who chairs the National ACC Women in Cardiology Group, are also here with us today. And both of our chapters received funding from the National ACC to create this program. And we're really very proud to be able to launch it today with all of you here. And one of the reasons we created this program is that we're all very well aware of the prevalence of these difficult situations in cardiology, but we also realize that fellows in training, cardiologists, and cardiology team members may not always be equipped with the skills that are needed to navigate these difficult interactions. And so the goal of this four-part series is really to educate, coach, and train cardiology team members to recognize these workplace issues, develop effective strategies to navigate challenging situations, and then become local ambassadors and allies for further dissemination of these skills. So as you know, the coaching program actually has four parts. And so today we're here to talk about tackling hostility and conflict management, and we'll be discussing negotiation and confrontation skills. And we hope that you'll be able to join us for future sessions. So our next session, hosted by the Pennsylvania chapter and Dr. Reza, will be, Katerina, I don't know if you want to show the next slide, will be on June 28th, and will be about handling microaggressions, discrimination, and bias. Then we'll have our third section on August 2nd, about growing as a leader and overcoming institutional barriers. And finally, we'll have the fourth part of this series. The date is still to be determined. Katerina, do you have the slide of the fourth session?
We don't have that one yet.
So that we still have to pick the date for that, but we do have the title of that session, which is about finding allies and advocating for change. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for the following parts of the series as well. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderators for this evening and the co-chairs of the New York chapter of the ACC Women in Cardiology Committee, Dr. Benita Shah and Dr. Eugenia Genius. So Dr. Shah is an associate professor and interventional cardiologist at NYU, where she is also the associate director of research for the cardiac cath lab. And Dr. Gianos is director of women's heart health at Lenox Hill Hospital and the director of cardiovascular prevention for Northwell Health. So Dr. Shah, Dr. Gianos, this is now your program. Go ahead.
Oops, thank you. I think I was on mute. I don't know about you, Benita, but hopefully you've unmuted yourself. And thank you so much for the introductions and for including us in this series. Essentially, we were looking to put forth content, and we created this idea because we thought it would be useful to everyone. And apparently DEI had very similar ideas, and we're looking to create an entire program. So we hope you can join for all of the other ones that are being planned in the future. And so what you'll see is that today we are fortunate to be joined by Jeff Jacobi, who is the founder and director of Jacobi Persuasive. Actually, what is the title exactly?
Jacobi Persuasive Speaking.
Speaking, thank
you.
That's what it is. My notes were incomplete. And tonight what we're going to do is go through a few scenarios. So we're actually going to do some role playing, and we have a couple of us who are going to try this out for you to partly be amused, but also hopefully learn. But if any of you are willing, you can think about it while we do our first one. We may need a couple of volunteers for the last ones. So Benita, and actually one quick thing, just some reminders we're supposed to let you know that when you're not speaking, please just mute. You can use the chat box to make comments or ask questions. We do want this to be interactive, so you do have the ability to speak. We want actually for everybody to discuss this, and as we get instruction and education from Jeff, we want you to be interacting as well. We're also taping the didactic portion, but we will not tape the role playing or question answer portion. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, so yes, feel free. In other words, the reason for that, I think, is that so you can feel comfortable to do the role playing, and two, to ask, in an open forum what you want to ask, and it will not be recorded for the future. All right, so Benita, go right ahead.
Yeah, so before we get into the portion, I just also want to say, going along with the lines of not recording the Q&A portion, we just want this to be a safe space so that anyone can bring up examples from their institutions, from their own lives, without having to worry about, what's going to get out there. And so what the three things that I usually say in all of these types of forums and sessions is that please keep what's said here, at least the personal identifiable information here. Obviously, we want you to share the take-home points, but do not share specific examples of particular people and whatever situation is brought up here. So some degree of confidentiality. We want this to be as much of a judgment-free place as possible. So do try to keep in mind coming from a place of empathy when you're hearing someone's story. And lastly, I can't remember what the last one was. This is why I should write things down. But I'm going to go on mute because there's an ambulance in the background.
Perfect. No problem. You go on mute until my ambulance comes by, then you can come back. Okay, so I guess, Jeff, should we read the scenario for them to know what we're doing? Do you want to introduce anything,
I
Jeff,
remember,
first?
I'm sorry, I remember the third thing now. It's to, when we do speak up, we want to try to be, provide positive and creative solutions as much as possible. We can certainly empathize and share our own stories to show that, yes, some situations are just crappy, but we do want to keep the conversation moving more towards how we can address things rather than just all of the problems that are out there. Sorry.
No, great points, actually. Jeff, what would you
All
like
right.
us to do? You go right ahead.
I am good. Let me get my presentation up here real quick, and then we'll get started here. So. Okay, so it's a broad topic. Lots of stuff to cover, tackling hostility, conflict management, negotiation, confrontation, but you can see how they would all work together. And clearly when we have negotiations, these can be challenging conversations for sure. And I would say that women in particular probably face a particular set of challenges in some of these conversations. So as was said before, the goal here is to share some practical tips, techniques, and strategies to help you better navigate these conversations. And these are strategies that hopefully you can put to use as soon as this program is over. So let's take a look at some specific objectives today. We'll talk about how to manage difficult conversations. Again, strategies and techniques, I do promise you. We'll also talk about how to promote yourself, which is really, really important. And of course, the role plays will give you a chance to observe, and I'm very eager to get your feedback when you observe the role plays. That's critical to this class as well. So yes, I'll be chiming in from time to time with my feedback, but it's very important that we get feedback from everyone. So everyone here should see themselves as a feedback partner today. So with that said, let's start. I stay here, and you've probably heard this phrase used before, right? Know your value. But the bigger point, perhaps, or part of knowing your value is not being afraid to ask. And what I'm going to cover today are points that come from my own experience. I've been doing this for close to 30 years now, along with research that I have come across in this area as well. And the fact is that there are some women who don't ask enough for what they want. And if we start to analyze this and say, well, why is that? Why is that? There are two main reasons that I've found. And one is that women, or many women, tend to be very concerned about how they're going to be perceived if they ask, or if they ask for what they think might be too much. They're also concerned about jeopardizing the relationship with the person they're negotiating with, more so than men as a rule. Now, again, I'm not making generalizations here, but this is based on my own experience and research. Men tend to see negotiations as, more of a sport, right? Women are very concerned about, gee, if I offend someone, and is this going to affect my work relationship and all of that? And usually that's not the case. And you really have to weigh up two important factors here, which is the risk of asking or the risk of not asking. I will tell you the risk of asking is very small. The risk of not asking is quite large. And why do I say that? If you don't ask for what you really want, then what can happen? Well, resentment can start to build inside of you. If you don't ask for what you want, then people can assume that, well, maybe you're happy with the status quo, when in fact you're really not. And if you don't ask enough and often enough for what you want, then that could have a stalling effect in your career as well. So key message here, never be afraid to ask. Now, when you do ask, very, very important to let people know what you're looking for. And we're really talking here about constructing your own ideal job, if you will. You have to know what your 3-year plan is. Where do I want to be in 3 years? And you have to let others know where you want to be in 3 years. And then decide, okay, so what are my absolute needs to make that happen? And then what's my wish list? You may not get everything on your wish list, but you absolutely should get what you need for the must-haves. And you decide what that is. I mean, that could be doing more research, doing more imaging, maybe only seeing patients 3 times a week, maybe asking for more speaking opportunities. You decide what that is. Now, a little tip on salary negotiations, and there's plenty of research to support this, and that is you are always better asking for a specific amount. If you don't, research has found that you will get significantly less than those people who led with the actual number. One study I found, it was 32% less than those who did not come out with a specific number. Now, I know these numbers sometimes are tough to come out because you're a little afraid of, again, what's the perception? If I'm seen as asking for way too much, I don't know what they're thinking. Doesn't matter. Put something out there. And don't be afraid of going a little on the high side, or I should say what feels to you a little on the high side. I was coaching a very senior leader a number of years ago, and I always remember her story. She told me when she was first starting out in her career, and she had to do her fair share of negotiating on her own behalf, she would put out a number, and something very interesting would happen. Her toes inside her shoes would start to curl with that number, because she was so afraid. Oh my God, this is too much. And so this is what I call your toe curling number. And it's okay. It's okay if those toes start to curl a little bit. That probably means you have the right number. In fact, if your toes aren't curling, your number is probably a little too low. Okay. All right. Now, you give the number, and then you have to decide, okay, explain at least, how did you arrive at that number, right? What's the evidence for that number? And I have 3 short sentences here. I like to keep it nice and crisp in communication. This is what I want. Here's proof that I can actually do it. And here's how it benefits you. If you can't say how it benefits the other side, then less likely that you're going to get everything you want. So it's very important to know not just your own goals, but what's the goals of your department, what's the goals of your division. If you can tie your goals into the broader goals, oh, then a whole different story. Now, all of you should have my handouts, and you'll see my handouts are pretty comprehensive. If you go to handout number 1, page 1, it says Negotiation Strategy Planner. not going to go through it right now. I just want to alert you to where it is in your handouts. It's the first page of the first handout. You will see 6 boxes. And this is a little planner for you to look through these 6 boxes. This is an exercise you can do after this class. Look through these 6 boxes and ask yourself, which of these points am I currently including as part of my negotiation plan or prep, and which of these am I not? And highlight the ones that you're not including and ask yourself, should you be, right? So I think having a plan is really, really important. Now, when you do negotiate, you are going to get pushback, no question about it. So the best negotiators plan ahead, and they try to plan for different scenarios. How is this conversation going to play out? It can play out this way, this way, this way, or this way. So you have to get inside the head of the person you're negotiating with and try and predict how they're going to react, what they're going to say to your point. So for example, let's look at our very first quote here, right? You say something, you ask for something, and you get the classic line. You know, things are really tight right now in the division. COVID has really hit us hard. Okay. So you can acknowledge that. You can say, I totally understand that. I totally understand that. I also understand that right now there's a war for healthcare talent. And I understand that a lot of hospitals are working really hard to retain their top talent. So if you can make me happy, I really would appreciate that. It can be done all friendly and nice, and you've acknowledged their pain point, and yet you've made a point as well. All can be done in a very friendly tone. Here are a few other ideas. If they say, well, we don't normally put that in our contracts, right? You can say, gee, that's really unfortunate to hear. Such a valuable thing. Why wouldn't that be included? Notice how we're using questions. Questions are a more indirect form of communication. So they work very nicely. Now, the second one is a bit more direct. If they say, well, you know, no one else in our division has asked for this. The big question is, oh yeah, how do you really know that? How do you know that what they're telling you is really true in this one, right? This could be just one of those negotiations. Like, how do you know no one else has asked for this? As far as you know, people have asked for more than what you're asking for right now. So you could simply say, well, no one else is doing the number of things I'm doing. And the theme of documentation is so important. If you can't get something in your contract right now, it's always great to send that email after the meeting and say, you know, great conversation, enjoyed our conversation. You know, really happy to hear that we can revisit the compensation question 6 months from now. I really look forward to having that conversation. Right now it's documented. In your handouts on page 4, you are going to see quite a few helpful phrases. Again, we're not going to go through it right now. If we have time later on, we can take a look at it, but I want you to know where it is. It's page 4 of your handout, and I have a whole bunch of phrases there. They're tactful, they're diplomatic, so look them over, and I'm hoping that you can find a few that you might say, gee, you know, I hadn't thought about saying it that way, but yeah, I could see how that might work. I could see how that might work even with a very senior supervisor. All right, let's continue. A few general guidelines for encountering pushback. I always think it's a good idea to let them talk a little bit and spend some time listening. And I will tell you, as a gender, women are better listeners than men. No question about it. So you also ask good questions. Listening and asking questions is a great strategy for negotiation because you learn more about the other side. If you ask the right kinds of questions, you start to uncover what's behind the objection. When you get that extra information, you can then use that to better influence the other side. As we said earlier, yes, acknowledge their challenges, priorities, and goals. Let them know that you understand that. Doesn't always mean you're agreeing. Acknowledging means that you're hearing, right? And let them know that you're hearing that. Number 3 is an interesting strategy. Find a connection between your goals and theirs. Where can you find common ground? Now, you can try to find common ground below. Let's say it may be at the project level. If that doesn't work, you can take it up a notch. Can you find common ground at the department level? Take it up another notch. Can you find common ground at the division level? Can you find common ground at the institutional level? Somewhere in that conversation, you can say, look, Jim, we both want what's best for the division, right? That's the common ground, and then you work from there. So there's always common ground. You just have to see what level you can find it. And number 4 is, I call it neutralize. And again, this is you understanding, right? Showing your understanding. I can understand why your initial reaction would be X. You know, in fact, if I was in your position, I probably would have a similar reaction at first. However, once you hear more about my work on X, Y, Z, right? So I'm neutralizing that pushback. I'm understanding, putting myself in your shoes. Yeah, I could see that if I were in your position, definitely. But here's one thing maybe you're not aware of, right? And then that's where the conversation starts to get interesting. Now, having your ideas dismissed, this happens, probably more to women than to men. So a couple of tips here. Number 1, you never want to disengage from the conversation. I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen in one-on-one meetings. I've seen this happen in group meetings where the person gets shut down and that's it, right? No more comes out of that person for the rest of that meeting. That's not a good thing. That's probably what they want to have happen, but that's not what should be happening to you. So you want to do just the opposite. If someone shuts you down or dismisses your idea, it's your job to try to engage them in the dialogue. And I'm just picking names here, okay? When I say, no, Ritesh, tell me what you're thinking. So if Ritesh just makes a short little remark, try to get more information out of that person. Right? You can also sometimes be a bit more direct and address the behavior. You can just say, Ron, that sounds a bit dismissive. And sometimes by identifying the behavior, that leads to an interesting discussion because you're not just sitting there and pretending it's not happening. Point 4, if someone is dismissing your idea because they think, oh, it's just coming from you, well, that's one thing, and that's not good. But if you can lead with some compelling evidence, if you can say, a Stanford University study found this, and it's a lot harder to dismiss a Stanford University study, right? So leading with evidence is often a good strategy as well, and then you could put your idea behind that. Number 5 is a really good one of my favorites. You want to give the person who might be a bit dismissive towards you a chance to be part of your idea. I say here to be a co-creator. Even if they are a little dismissive, you can say, Dave, I'm open to your thoughts on how to build on my idea. And if Dave starts to put out a little, some ideas or some, in his mind, improvements, whatever, guess what? He now has a little skin in the game. It's going to be awfully hard for him to dismiss an idea that has part of his own idea in it, right? So that's an interesting strategy as well. And again, number 6, the strategy of documentation. Summarize those recommendations, put them in a follow-up email, make sure the right peers and the right supervisors know about it. So I'm giving you a bunch of things to think about now. And what I want to do is go to our first role play and see if we can put some of these strategies together. And we have some contestants, I will say, who have agreed to be part of this role play, which is great. Now, I'm counting on you, the audience, for feedback. So we're going to watch this realistic role play. And we're actually starting, those of you who have your handouts, we're starting with role play number 3. And this is on page 6 of your handouts. This is negotiating for more than just a title change. And I'd like you, before we do this role play, to take a quick look at the next page, page 7, what I call the observer sheet. And maybe if you would like me to, I can quickly pull that up so you can see it as well. Let's see here. This is going to be page 7. Whoops, that's the wrong one. Sorry about that. All right, let's take a look at page 7 here. I'll make it a little bit larger. This is the observer sheet. Now let's look at how I've broken this down. The first box is very important because that deals with how you are presenting yourself. I call it personal presentation. You can call it executive presence, whatever you want to call it, but it's really, really important because you can have the best ideas, you can have the best laid out negotiation plan, but if you don't come across convincing, then it's going to put a major dent in that negotiation. So I'm talking about things such as your voice tone, your pace, not speaking too quickly, your facial expression, your eye contact. By the way, when you're virtual, spending a bit more time on the camera is always a good way to connect with your virtual audience. Your posture, your gestures, all of these things make a difference. In fact, there's a very famous communication study, which was done in UCLA a while back ago, that found that the nonverbal, this is apart from what you say, how you look and how you sound has a tremendous impact, a much stronger impact than just the words that you use. So let's not discount number one. Number one is really important. And we're going to use that today as part of our feedback. The other boxes, again, are equally important. They are a bit more content related. So how is the conversation being opened? How's it being framed? That sets the whole tone. So you might want to work on that as well. By the way, when I say work on it, one of the best ways to practice for a negotiating conversation, there are really 2 ways. One of them is taking out your good old-fashioned iPhone or whatever phone you use and clicking the record button and you recording yourself, at the very least, opening the conversation. How are you going to frame the conversation? So you're doing that for 2 reasons. 1, to check your content, see how it sounds, and 2, to check your delivery, right? To see if you're coming across, again, with that nice, confident tone of voice and visual appearance as well. So framing the discussion sets the tone. Got to set the right tone. Listening and questioning, we'll be looking at that during this role play to see how effective is that. How much time did the person spend listening? What types of questions did they ask to get more information from the other side? What happened when maybe things got a bit more tense in that conversation? How is the composure? Were they able to maintain their composure? How is the problem solving ability? Number 5 here, right? Did they identify the roadblocks? Were they able to find common ground? And then, of course, point number 6, the meeting management. Was the person able to keep the discussion on track? Did it get sidetracked? Did it go off on tangents? Did you manage the time effectively? Right. And then what happened at the end of that discussion? Did the person walk away with some very clear action steps? Were agreements summarized, or was it just kind of left open-ended? So all of these boxes are extremely important. So really, this is a tool to be used 2 ways. 1, it's a tool for feedback, how to give feedback for the role plays today, but it's also a little checklist for you, a checklist for you to look at ahead of time before you actually have your negotiation, and maybe directly after your negotiation to sort of evaluate how you did. Okay, so for now, we're going to be using it as a way to give targeted feedback to our role play participants. Okay, techniques here, and that is, a lot of women, when this happens, when someone starts to talk over you, it's almost like a reflex action. They will pull back, they will stop talking, and they let the other person interrupt. Right? And if you complain about always being interrupted, you have to ask yourself, well, I'm only being interrupted if I let the other person interrupt me. Think about that for a second. So what I'm getting at is, get used to continuing to talk until you finish your point. And the way you do that is, and this works nicely in a one-on-one or even a group meeting, you increase the volume and you keep talking until you finish your point. You are sending a vocal signal to the other side, right? That I am not stopping, I'm finishing my point because I got there first and I was started to speak, right? You came in on me and I'm going to continue my thought. So you can't ramble, but if you're nice and crisp in your thoughts, then that's one technique to use. You don't always have to be the one that pulls back and pulls out. I have a couple of other phrases here that are interesting. And sometimes you can say, Ritesh, I wasn't finished yet. So names, especially in meetings, are very important. Names get attention. Jesse, one more point. Again, very nice, but just let them know you have one more point left. Kyle, hang on a second. Right? So work on that. Work on that. Someone interrupts you only if you let them. Now, if they succeed in interrupting you, and they start and they've gotten your spot, so to speak, then your next best bet is you have to wait for their next to last word. And on that next to last word, that's when you come back in and you regain your spot. It's really split-second timing. But I've seen this happen sometimes in meetings where woman gets interrupted, she pulls back, other person finishes, then someone else comes in, then someone else comes in, and then we never hear from that person again. That's not good. Right, you got to get back in the game as quickly as possible. All right, so a few tips there just to think about. If things start to get heated, again, I have some phrases for you that you can use that I think will be very helpful, but just a few general guidelines here, right? Sometimes it's hard. We may get caught up in the other person's emotions. That's why Dr. Giannis did so well here. She didn't do that. She kept her composure, kept her cool throughout. That was excellent. We often, as women, take it more personally than men do. And we have to think about that. Even though they're saying things that may be a little hurtful to us, we have to remember and take a step back and say, you know what? He's just doing his job. He's trying to save the hospital money. Okay, fine. That's what's really happening here, even though I feel a bit like it's a personal attack. No, he's doing his job and I have to do my job, which is I have to fight for what I want. And if you just see it that way, he's doing his job, I'm doing my job, it makes it less personal. Okay? We saw what happened here. Again, Dr. Shah tried to sidetrack the discussion. Dr. Giannos was great. She very smoothly kept it right back. And then she even used the theme of family to weave in another ask on her part. Again, women being good listeners, use that skill. Hear them out, ask good questions, find out what's behind the objection. If we just hear the objection and fight back, we don't always have enough information. You ask some more questions, you see what's generating that objection, and then you have more evidence you can use to influence the other side. Okay, so with that said, let's go to role play number 2. Let's be ready to promote yourself. Why do I say be ready? Let me tell you a story that happened to one of my clients, if I will, or at least a physician I know and I highly respect. And this is when she was in a meeting that had nothing to do with any negotiation, right? And towards the end of the meeting, guess who shows up? A senior admin, what's the best way of saying it? A divisional admin shows up to this meeting and unannounced, uninvited, and all of a sudden says, well, I think you'd be really, really happy here. We're in the process of renegotiating your contract, and we have a number that we really think you're going to be pleased with. And he actually goes and puts out the number in a meeting that he hasn't even scheduled. Now, this other person was sharp enough not to fall in that trap. And she actually said, well, okay, I actually was thinking more about a number like this. She put out a much higher number. Now, that was not the final negotiating conversation. But think about what happened there, right? This is a tactic. The person tried to catch the other person off guard and get them to agree to something when they weren't ready. So if this happens to you, and I say you never know when a negotiation is going to happen, you have 2 options. Number 1, always be ready to have that conversation, right? Know what the salary is, know what your next move is, always have that ready to go. But number 2, if you really are being caught off guard and you're not ready to have the conversation, then in a nice way, you can just say, look, I appreciate you coming to me with this number. but I will tell you that a compensation discussion is a very important discussion for me, and I want to make sure I give this the full attention it deserves. So how about this? Let me take a few days to think this over, and let's come back, let's meet again, and then we can have the full conversation. Again, all nice, right? But it's too important a conversation to just get caught off guard on. So watch out for that. This can happen. When you do want more responsibility, paint the picture for them, show them what it's going to look like. You know, if there are gaps you can fill, tell them what those gaps are. And then if you still feel that there's some resistance there, you can ask this important question. What can I do to make you confident that I'm ready for this next level? That's a valid question. Hear what they have to say. And then you can respond, or at least know what you have to do, actions you have to take. And it's very important to make sure these discussions are ongoing. You might not be able to resolve this in one discussion, but these career goal discussions should be happening on a regular basis. And it's up to you to make sure that they are happening. You have to be proactive. You have to schedule these discussions. All right, so maybe what I'll do is, quick point here. I was asked to put this together. Different ways to address conflict. Take a quick look. This is also part of your handouts. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but you have options, right? There's certain times when you might be crazy busy and it's just not that important to you. So you might decide, okay, you know what? This isn't worth it. This isn't worth my time. And that's number one. Number two, you might not be in love with direct conflict. So there might be certain situations where you say, you know what, I think this person would be better convinced by someone else versus me. So maybe I'll plant the idea in someone else's ear and I'll let them do it, right? That's sort of more the indirect approach. Number three is, of course, the direct approach. When it really matters, the relationship matters to you and it's worth investing the time. Number four is when you start to have the conversation and you realize it's just going nowhere. And sometimes you just need to exit. So these are four strategies for you to think about when addressing conflict. Again, this is in your handout as well. So we have a few minutes left. Maybe we should take a few more questions here.
Okay, I'll unmute myself now. Yeah, so how do you deal with, I guess this is relatively similar, with confrontation with a senior attending as a junior attending? So let's say you're new to the office or you're new to the you know, and how do you come off, I guess, sort of and be heard as this junior person? And I don't know if you have any advice there.
Well, again, one of the first things that I like to do is, and again, as a junior person, you may not have as much information on this person that you're going to be meeting with. So what I always like to do is gather intelligence before the meeting. I don't think this is done enough, where you go to other people who've had prior exposure to this senior person and you really sit down and you ask good quality questions. What's this person like? What's their style? Right? And you'll get some good information. And then with that information, you know, okay, this person, if you can't get your point out in the first 20 seconds, forget it. So now you know, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to practice my first 20 seconds so I have this down, right? If this person is not a very good listener, right, you need to know that in advance. So I think that gathering intelligence on that audience is so important. And again, I take Dr. Shah's point before about sometimes it is a bit of a mix. If you want to go in, you want to be confident, you want to let them know that you have certain wants and needs. That's absolutely important. But if the person's really senior, maybe they can give you some advice along the way to help you in that journey as well. So there are different ways to approach that.
Perfect. And actually, one thing that we haven't really gotten to, at length is hostility. So when you have a boss that is either, irate at times, condescending, how do you diffuse like hostility, things like that? I know that you potentially have experience there.
Yeah, well, again, sometimes, you have to let the person know what's coming out because they may be so used to that and they may have gotten away with it for so many years that, right? So someone has to be able to say, right now, I actually feel that, you are diminishing me, or I don't feel respected right now. Maybe it's time. Maybe we should reschedule this meeting. And I'm happy to have to talk to your admin and see if we can have another time, or let them know how it's making you feel. That you have every right to do that. And sometimes you have to say, look, if you use that kind of language, I really can't continue in this conversation. So maybe we should reschedule. All right.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I actually had
yeah.
a scenario like that where it came from someone who I actually respected and admired very much, which made it even more difficult because it was subtle, but it was, happened often enough that it was weighing on me and it was wearing me down. And I ended up just pulling him aside at some point and saying, can we talk? Because sometimes I just feel like I feel like you don't trust me. And that may not, I was like, this is my perception of what, somehow some of our conversations go. And it was, it was a really great conversation because, I tried not to attack the person and I tried to keep it open for discussion, but I wanted to be very clear about how it made me feel.
Yes, you can never go wrong by saying how it made you feel, because only you know that, right?
Yeah.
And let me give all of you a quick model for feedback. Maybe some of you have heard this before. It's called the SBI model for feedback. And what it means is you tell them, you start with the situation. So you might say, Benita, in yesterday's meeting, when we were having this discussion, right, that's the situation. Now, what was the behavior? I noticed that you kept shutting me down, or you kept interrupting, or you didn't let me finish my point. That's the behavior portion. And then the SBI is the impact. When that happens, it makes me feel like, again, you don't trust me, or you don't care about what I have to say. So situation, behavior, impact, and then there's another little A at the end called actions. What are the actions? Maybe next time, if you were to try this approach, maybe that would work better. Is that something that you would be open to considering, right? So situation, behavior, impact it's having on you, or maybe even on other people, and then the actions to try and correct it. It's a nice model. It's pretty simple to remember. Can come in handy.
Great.
But it's not, it's not easy giving feedback giving upward feedback, but it is something that has to happen. Yeah.
Right. And the way you describe it is exactly that. Like, you're supposed to describe the behavior very objectively. So yesterday, when we were in the room, you raised your voice, or you did whatever, not you sounded angry. Like, that's
right.
just
it's not the
objective.
impression.
That's
it's not the
subjective.
impression. It's the action.
Exactly. You describe objectively. You can talk about later how it made you feel. Right. But you have to describe very objectively and then go back. And then something that somebody had told me is you get in life what you tolerate. Like, oh,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or what you put up with or whatever. So exactly. I think with these screaming bosses and the whatever, and that happens. It's not uncommon, sort of like you sort of say, look, I understand, this, like you said, it may be a bad time, you may be angry, but I can't have this conversation in this way, but we can talk about it later, whatever. It's like, you have to set the rules for how
Correct.
you will have that conversation.
Yeah, about how you want to, how you expect to be talked to, how you expect to be treated. That's correct. Everyone deserves to be treated respectfully and professionally. That's just the baseline.
Right. I say that, and it's not easy because these are the same people who are making all those decisions. And when you're in the moment, you're sort of like,
well, in a funny way, that person, as senior as they are, actually respects you when you do that. It's interesting. Yeah. I've seen it happen in meetings where they actually back down, or they come back to you a day or two later, and they acknowledge some of that behavior, but they actually respect you. And this is what I want to tell women as well. Women, more than men, are more concerned about being liked. I get that, but it is more important to be respected than it is to be liked. Remember that. If you can have both, that's great. But if you have to pick one or two, you want to be respected.
Great advice. And there's another question about specifically, how do you negotiate in a racially hostile environment? And there's, yeah, I mean, you know, bringing up, and this is interesting. I have a friend who's a lawyer, and once I was like, well, if they bring that up, should I mention that, you know, women are underpaid and whatever? And she's like, actually, no. She's like, because they're going to label you as, you know, being difficult or, you know, being too, you know, feminist or this and that. She's like, just argue your points, but like bringing up race and racism and whether you're being treated unfairly because of race or because of gender,
yeah,
you know, or sexuality, like those, should you be bringing that stuff up? How do you address it?
Yeah. Well, you know, you raised a topic about labels, and this is really important as well, because, you know, again, women tend to have more labels put on them than men do unfairly. And there are really two strategies with that. One is don't allow anyone to put a label on you, right? So I wouldn't even allow that to happen. That's really more their insecurity than anything else. The other way to play that is you label the labelers, meaning when you're talking to Dr. X, whatever, you know, or in a meeting with Dr. Y, X, you say to yourself, not out loud, but okay, so this is Mr. has to be right. This is Mr. Mr. Patronizer. This is Mr. Control freak, right? And just having those internal labels, you know, in a way can help you as well. So they're labeling you, you can label them. Okay. But one thought I want to leave you with too, and it was a very senior woman I was working with at a big corporation, and I asked her, what did you do when you were more junior in your career? How did you handle, you know, the double standard? And she looked at me and she said, oh, simple. She said, when I go to work, I never think of myself as a woman. And I thought that was really interesting. When I go to work, I never think of myself as a woman. And that was her way of just busting that whole wall down.
I like that. That's awesome.
Maybe that should be our ending note.
I like it. Yeah. Any questions from the audience that anyone wants to even just speak up? Feel free, honestly. They're telling us we can take one or two more questions if anybody has any, and then Benita will definitely want to hear from you.
I have a question. How do you normalize talking to people in different parts of hierarchy? I mean, I know there is a hierarchy in many places, and men seem to have an easier time navigating that because they can be quote unquote pally or buddy or play golf or go for a drink. How as women can we work on pathways to kind of normalize interactions between all levels of your hierarchy without it being every time you go to someone, it's for an ask?
Yeah.
Or for a discussion. So it allows, you know, more communication to happen in kind of a low risk environment.
That's important. Yeah, that's very important. So, you know, again, how to build rapport and not just make it transactional when you need something, as you said. So, look, maybe certain men have an advantage, but I know some very fine women golfers, by the way. So, but the point is, how can you connect with them on a personal level? It doesn't have to happen on the golf course. And this can happen in very small ways. I mean, for example, if you're on a conference call and you're waiting for other people to join and that doctor or doctors are on that call, you can initiate some small talk. And it can be more than just the weather, right? It can be about sports, by the way. I always think this is sometimes a dividing line. Some women are not very sports minded, and sometimes they're left out of conversations as a result. I'm not suggesting that you have to spend hours watching ESPN, but you know, if you know that this guy is a huge Yankees fan, right? You should know going into that meeting that, okay, the Yankees had a major upset last night, and you should at least be able to put that out there, and that will generate a certain discussion, and you'll be seen as being part of that, as opposed to, oh, you know, I'm just not, you know, I don't know much about sports. I hear this a lot from some of the non-native speakers that I work with, who just figure like baseball. You know, we're soccer. We don't do baseball. What's that? You know, I said, well, you know, if you know your audience is, you know, are fans of the sport just know a tiny bit, enough to enter in and be part of that conversation. So it is up to you to initiate conversations beyond work. You know, you have to be comfortable talking about things outside of work, and maybe you need to plan that a little bit. What conversations can you plan on having?
Yeah. Or even just asking about, oh, how's the family, or,
Well,
did you enjoy the weekend, things like that.
Yeah.
Small talk sometimes can help to sort of get you on the same, page for then
And
just having the serious talks.
Yeah, and if people are going out for drinks after work, and maybe you weren't exactly invited, but you could, if you know it's happening, oh, hey, I'd love to join you guys, and just sort of get in there.
And then there's sometimes you don't see someone very often, like say it's a leadership person where their office isn't just down the hall. You can't just drop by, and you end up reaching out to them more for asks and things like that. I think an email, congratulating someone on anything good that happens goes a long way too, or a text or something that says, something happened, it's on whatever you heard about someone getting an award or someone, or even just a small thing that comes up, be like, hey, I heard this happened, great news, congratulations.
I think that's very, very important. And if you come across an article of interest that maybe the person didn't say, hey, you know what, we had a conversation the other day, just saw this in the New England Journal of Medicine, thought this might be of interest to you. That's good too. But I wouldn't keep it all email and text. How about having just a 10-minute, coffee chat, video chat, Zoom chat? I know people are zoomed out right now. I get that, but there is something about hearing the person's voice that sometimes the text and email, it's good, it's documented, that's all good, but it can be a little cold sometimes as well. So maybe mixing in a little bit of a video coffee chat or something like that.
I also think that having just low level conversations where there is no ask is very important, because I think sometimes people are so focused on transactional deals where they don't make any connections. And I find that, when people even go to networking events, their whole deal is like, I need to meet X, Y, and Z because I need X, Y, and Z from these people, rather than meeting a whole bunch of people that they need nothing from today, but they may need something from in 2 years.
Right.
So I think that just changing your mindset about why you want to meet people. This is your colleague, this is your leader. You want them to get to know you, you want to know them. So you're just meeting. And then that person sometimes is nicely surprised that you don't need anything from them. And they're more likely to meet with you in a collegial manner, because they know that every phone call from you doesn't mean something needs to be done or something bad is happening.
That's true. That's very true. I also think it's important, though, when you go to events, to be able to work the room. And meaning, I've seen people at events and they only talk to people they already know, and they're not spending enough time initiating new relationships as well. So you have to, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, but you have to be able to do that. And if two people are already in a pre-existing conversation, you walk up with your drink, you go up to them, you stand there, you listen a little bit, and then you start to contribute as part of that conversation. You don't always have to be invited in. Invite yourself.
Great. Do you have time for one more, or shall we? And we have one question: what's the right thing to do? And this is not an uncommon scenario, especially with a higher hierarchy, somebody stealing your idea or taking credit for something that you did. How do you handle that?
Okay. Well, a couple of things. Again, there are different strategies here, right? One way is, and I think it's important for women especially, to have allies. And when I say allies, I don't just mean female allies, I mean male allies. Really, really important. And these are the allies who sometimes, again, indirectly can spread the word and say, oh, actually, that really was her idea, and they do that outside the meeting. That can be extremely valuable. So it can be a little awkward if you say, well, actually, that was my idea, right? You can't quite say it like that, but you can say, well, I'm glad you like that idea, Jerry. When I raised that last week, with so-and-so, I also got a very positive response. So it's very subtle, but you're letting it know that it wasn't just his or her idea, but it came from you. So different strategies, but I definitely would work on, if you don't have a good set of male allies, it's time to work on that. Time to work on that because they can do a tremendous amount of good for you as well.
Very true.
Right.
Amazing. Great. So lots of positive feedback, and Hema, you go right ahead.
No, Eugenia, Benita, if you wanted to say a few last words, and then I'll just say a few things about our upcoming events.
I'm just happy that so many people joined, and all the feedback has been great. I wrote back to somebody, if only we had this earlier in our careers, but never too late, of course. And hopefully any questions, again, this is also like somewhat of a network, hopefully, for you. So if you have questions, all of this, people on here for WIC, just reach out individually. We're happy to help and, promote everyone's careers. So
Yeah, I was going to echo that sentiment about network. I was fortunate enough to stay on at an institution that had a fair number of women. So we would just go out for happy hour and I'd learn all these things on how to deal with these things, but not everyone has that. And this was meant to be another step towards us creating a community so that even if we're not at the same institution, we can still share and lean on each other.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeffrey, for really an excellent, interactive, and very engaging presentation. Thank you, Eugenia and Benita, for doing an amazing job as moderators. Thank you, Nosheen and Tanya, for all your help arranging these sessions and creating this program. And we have our New York ACC Cardiovascular Team Members Symposium in New York City on June 24th coming, and it's first of its kind because we have a series of lectures, but also a dissection event scheduled for that date. So we hope to see you at that session, and then keep your eyes on emails and social media for more information about the upcoming 3 seminars that are part of this coaching program. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I really enjoyed this session, and it was great discussion, great participating with all of you.
Sorry, and one more thing before I forget, actually, and hopefully I can get the date correct. So yeah, Benita and we've been trying, with our New York's WIC group to plan events and everything, and COVID obviously has made things really challenging. Even this session that we had started working on for many, many months, finally came through with this working with the other group and putting it forth. But on Tuesday, what is the date, Benita? Do you even know? We have a live happy hour in Manhattan. June 21st. It's Tuesday, June 21st, a beautiful place on the water where you guys can join and have appetizers and drinks on WIC. So, and then you can network and you can really share with more of the women. So please join us on June 14th.
Oh,
Sonia,
June
you
21st.
can fly in. Tonya, you can fly in. I'm sorry, the 21st.
Okay. Yeah,
Not
I have
the
I have a kid who lives there, so yeah, I might take you up on that invitation.
Perfect. And it's in the chat as well if you want to look at the event. So thank you. And thank you, Jeffrey. This is great advice. We really appreciate your input.
Well, thank you. A special thanks to you, to Benita, to Mary Patterson for putting this together and for inviting me to be a speaker. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Great job as usual with you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And you brought up the Yankees. It's John Sterling. You sound exactly like.
Oh boy, I have to
Gotta go listen to him. John
Gotta
Sterling.
go. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.